Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I want you to kick things off by asking yourself a really simple question. Do you think good writing is a universal concept? I mean, we often just kind of assume that a well-written essay or a totally solid research paper is going to look the exact same no matter where you are in the world. But what if the very structure of your thoughts, like how you argue, how you present your evidence, or even how polite you are on paper, is entirely dictated by the culture you grew up in? Today, we're going to explore how culture fundamentally shapes academic writing. Okay, let's dive into this, because this is where it gets incredibly fascinating. See, we tend to treat academic writing as just this neutral vehicle for transmitting facts. But it's not neutral at all. It is a deeply cultural practice. So, what actually happens when your native culture's perfectly logical way of organizing an argument is suddenly judged as disorganized, rude, or totally off topic by the gatekeepers of global academia? To figure that out, we're going on a fast-paced global tour. Here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll shatter the myth of universal writing, define contrastive rhetoric, and then unpack the globally dominant Anglo-American style. From there, we'll look at a brilliant case study comparing marketing versus poetic writing, explore how cultural politeness drives these differences, and finally, face the towering reality of the English language as an academic predator. Let's get into it. Section 1. The myth of universal writing. Is science truly universal? You know, we usually operate on this unspoken assumption that scientific research exists totally outside of culture. Like, it's just this common pool of human knowledge that advances regardless of borders. But, as linguist Anna Moranin argues, academic research absolutely does not exist outside of writing. We literally cannot represent science without being heavily influenced by the writing cultures that carry it. Writing is a cultural object. It only exists in the social world of humans, and it's massively shaped by the specific educational system you went through in your native culture. Section 2. What is contrastive rhetoric? The cultural lens of linguistics. So what exactly is contrastive rhetoric? Well, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's the specific field where linguists actively use the notion of culture to explain why written text looks so incredibly different across the globe. Researchers in this field study how first language and second language writers drastically differ in their preferred ways of organizing ideas. Basically, a structure that feels completely natural and logical to a writer in one language might feel confusing or even totally disjointed to a reader from another. Section 3. The Anglo-American writing style. Explicit and rigid. To really understand how writing differs globally, we've got to look at what is currently considered the global standard. In a massive review of 72 different studies comparing first and second language writing, Tony Silva highlighted just how unique the Anglo-American style really is. I mean, it is incredibly explicit. It absolutely demands that you state your purpose immediately. It relies heavily on recent citations, and this is a big one, it is remarkably intolerant of digressions. Wandering off topic isn't just a quirky stylistic choice here, it's practically a major offense. You're expected to use connectors like therefore and however to literally hold the reader's hand every single step of the way. Just looking at this checklist, I want you to reflect on your own first language for a second. Do you naturally get straight to the point and aggressively cite your sources? Or do you prefer to gently set the scene, maybe explore a few interesting side thoughts, and let the main point reveal itself organically? Because in the Anglo-American style, the burden of clarity is placed entirely on the writer, not the reader. Section 4. Marketing versus poetic writing. The tour guide versus the solitary traveler. Let's make this super concrete with a brilliant analogy from Maureen Chanin, contrasting Anglo-American writers with Finnish writers. She describes the explicit, heavily structured Anglo-American style as a marketing approach. The author acts like a really loud tour guide with a megaphone, taking you by the hand and explicitly stating the thesis over and over so you literally can't miss it. Contrast that with the Finnish style, which she calls poetic. The Finnish author acts more like a solitary traveler, walking the path alone, making minimal inscriptions and simply leaving tracks in the snow for you to find. In this style, it's reader responsible. The reader actually has to put in the effort to interpret those marks and draw their own conclusions. Section 5. Politeness, Power, and Culture. The why behind the writing. So, why do these two cultures write so completely differently? Well, it actually boils down to psychology, and more specifically, cultural definitions of politeness. To a Finnish writer, explaining every little detail is just patronizing. You show politeness by treating your reader as a highly intelligent equal who doesn't need the obvious spelled out for them. But to an Anglo-American writer, leaving things implicit is seen as arrogant and unconcerned. Anglo writers feel it's their polite duty to do the heavy lifting, providing crystal clear guidance so the reader doesn't have to struggle at all. What's polite in one culture is quite literally considered rude in the other. And this brilliantly illustrates how these differences play out on a massive global scale. Western cultures tend to emphasize independent, analytical views that prioritize questioning and extending knowledge. Meanwhile, many Asian cultures are historically more collectivist, placing a lot of value on conserving and reproducing existing knowledge out of deep respect. And then you have Slavic academic writing, which tends to be super content-focused, prioritizing deep theorizing and broad generalizations over the strict formal structure you see in the West. And this starts early. Educational processes deeply reinforce these stances in the classroom. Western teachers often expect students to voice independent judgments and self-promote their ideas. But this can create severe conflicts for students from collectivist cultures, whose education has traditionally oriented them toward group harmony and respecting established wisdom. So when a student from a knowledge-conserving culture uses imitation out of respect, a Western teacher might totally misinterpret that and penalize them for plagiarism or a lack of originality. Furthermore, researcher Tatiana Yakontova points out this idea of a market society reality. Western scholars operate in a highly competitive system where they literally have to sell their research to win funding and international recognition. This is exactly why Anglo-Saxon texts are so reader-friendly, persuasive, and explicitly structured. They are pitching you. Contrast this with, say, Slavic abstracts, which often strictly theorize and totally avoid those self-promotional marketing tactics altogether. Section 6. The English Tyrannosaurus Rex, Surviving the Landscape. To really wrap our heads around the reality of the modern academic landscape, just look at this staggering number, 31. That is the percentage of all papers published in mainstream scientific journals back in 1994 that emanated from the USA alone. By contrast, Japan was next with only 8%, and countries like Brazil were way down at 0.6%. America's role as the global academic gatekeeper has created a massive, wrenching disproportion. Because of this overwhelming dominance, the linguist John Swales came up with a really vivid and honestly slightly terrifying analogy. He compared the English language to a Tyrannosaurus Rex, just this massive, unstoppable predator taking over the global academic ecosystem and devouring absolutely everything in its path. Swales noted English as a Tyrannosaurus Rex. When a culture starts to lose its genres, it begins to die. And that's a chilling thought, right? The global advance of English, with its incredibly strict rules on citations, its explicit structures, and its absolute zero tolerance for digressions, is actively leading to the loss of diverse scholarly writing styles in other national cultures. If everyone on Earth has to write exactly like an American just to get published, our global ways of thinking become dangerously impoverished. To combat this, Moraine proposes what she calls a cultural rainforest argument. Just as we passionately protect biodiversity in nature, we must maintain variety and diversity in our academic rhetorical practices, because excessive standardization actively destroys the unique cultural thought patterns that are quite literally embodied in how different societies structure their arguments. So I leave you with this final thought. If English truly is the Tyrannosaurus Rex of academia, constantly demanding explicit thesis statements and completely refusing to tolerate your digressions, how do we survive its domain? How can scholars successfully navigate this rigid Anglo-American landscape to be heard without letting their own unique cultural voices go extinct on paper? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning what you read, and maybe even more importantly, how it's written.